G'day you mob, Pete here, and this is another episode of Aussie English, the number one place for anyone and everyone wanting to learn Australian English. So today I have a Goss episode for you where I sit down with my old man, my father, Ian Smisson, and we talk about the week's news, whether locally down under here in Australia or non-locally overseas in other parts of the world. Okay, and we sometimes also talk about whatever comes to mind, right? If we can think of something interesting to share with you guys related to us or Australia, we also talk about that in the Goss. So these episodes are specifically designed to try and give you content about many different topics where we're obviously speaking in English and there are multiple people having a natural and spontaneous conversation in English. So it is particularly good to improve your listening skills. In order to complement that though, I really recommend that you join the podcast membership or the academy membership at aussieenglish.com.au, where you will get access to the full transcripts of these episodes, the PDFs, the downloads, and you can also use the online PDF reader to read and listen at the same time. Okay, so if you really want to improve your listening skills fast, get the transcript, listen and read at the same time, keep practicing, and that is the quickest way to level up your English. Anyway, I've been rabbiting on a bit. I've been talking a bit. Let's just get into this episode, guys. Smack the bird, and let's get into it. What's going on, Dad?
Hey, Pete.
Man,
before we get on to anything else.
Becoming Australian. Nice.
There we go.
Hold it up.
The family. If I hold it up,
is there a photo of me on the front?
It just disappears. No, you're not. You didn't make the front cover.
You bastard.
You want me to hang on? I have to find you where see when you did make a picture. You made something somewhere.
You might want to mention what this is that you're holding up for the people who can't see.
I will. Here we go. We're going to put you in front of me.
You're going to have to hold it up higher, I think, Dad.
I can't hold it up too much because if I hold it up there, it disappears. There you go. There's Pete as a baby.
That does
2 days
not
old.
look like me.
No.
Far out. I had a lot of hair.
You did. You look like my mother decided that your father was Chinese for a while because you had this big swathe of black hair.
Yeah.
Family history book just finished. Yay, published.
Out. Yeah, do you want to give that a spiel? Maybe just talk about what it is and why you decided to
what it is and why I decided to do it. Yeah, well, it was sort of I got interested in our family history when I was probably in my early 20s, just from a general interest. My grandfather lived with us, and just talking to him about old family stories and things, because he was the only grandparent that I really knew. His wife, my mother's mother, died before I was 2 years old, and my father's parents lived in England. Never met them, and in fact, my father was sort of he never spoke to them after about 1950. So I never knew them at all. So the only grandfather I knew was the one who lived with us for the last 12 years or so of his life. And so I sort of got interested in family history then. And then my father died when I was 25. And my mother died when I was 40. And I looked at it and went, if I don't start recording some of these stories, my grandchildren, who at the time didn't exist, but now I've got 4, will never know anything. So I just got interested in family history, started collecting things, and this huge database of information, which is completely unintelligible to anybody else. I decided I'd put it together and write the book about my family history. So it's really a letter to you and your sister and your children of this is where I came from. So it's
a tough one, isn't it, when you write a book and you've got a target audience of 2?
Yeah, exactly. Well, 6, but it's the same audience. I mean, obviously, I've got I sisters. Had 2.5 sisters, but 2 sisters who have the same ancestry and their children as well. So it is as relevant to your cousins, not that they have children yet, but and their children in the future. So I'm only going to get 25 copies run off to start with, and that'll probably be enough. I decided in the end that while I say published, it is self-published and printed and so on, but I decided in the end not to record an ISBN, which would mean that a copy would have to go to the National Library and the State Library of Victoria, because it contains a lot of personal information, and it contains chapters written by my two sisters as well, and I didn't get their permission to do that. So,
Yeah.
So that's the only distinction really between publishing and producing multiple copies of the book.
So there's no way
so
for
a
the
few
audience
cousins
to
and
get
things will get them.
I was going to say you should sprinkle to the audience, but take it that you're not selling these.
No, I'm not. Yeah, you want it for $100, which is about what it will cost to print and post.
Good God.
Well, when you're doing a print run of 25, they cost $70+ each. If I did a print run of 1,000, they would probably cost me $30 each. So,
but it'd be $30,000. Yeah.
Exactly.
All right. So, looking back, was it worth doing?
Oh, well, ultimately, the test will be you and your sister and your children.
I'm not going to read it. I've got stuff
no,
to
I know.
do, Dad.
Yeah,
I'm just going to flick through and look at the pictures.
And look, the other thing, too, was it was a lockdown project when I sort of started thinking about it at the beginning of last year.
Yeah.
And then when we went into lockdown in February, I thought, oh, well, I might as well just start putting this together. And then one thing led to another. And, it's finally come to fruition, which was it was fun. As much as anything else, it was fun just to look at the holes and try and make a complete story, complete in a sense of what do I know and what do I not know, and what holes do I need to fill, and finding out a bit more information about my aunt and uncle and stuff to fill up a chapter on them was interesting, and getting back in contact with a couple of cousins that I haven't spoken to for years was fun as well. So.
How do you know when it's done?
Well, your family history is never done because by definition.
Book, I guess the
well,
book, how do you know when to say that's enough? Because I imagine it's a diminishing curve.
Of course it is.
Returns curve, right? Like learning a language where, learning a language you're never done because it's not sort of a finalized product that you have at the end of the day, except for maybe on your deathbed. But, with like an album that you're creating, a musical album, it's always one of those things that people talk about where it's like, how did you know when it was finished?
When is good enough? Yeah, it is. Although with this one, it started off with, well, I'll just write my story. Ironically, that was one of the last ones that I ended up doing because I thought, well, if I'm going to do me, then, and I asked my two sisters if they would write theirs.
I thought you were going to say to write part of yours.
to write the equivalent so that, because they're as much a part of my family, and I can talk about what I think of them, but for them to talk about their experiences, because as much as anything else, it's about answering the questions. And I think I wrote it in the introduction that it was about answering the questions for my grandchildren that I never got to ask my grandparents. So the unasked questions in both cases. So it was an interesting way of doing that. And then it was going back and looking at it and going, well, how much is enough? But you're right in terms of, well, when you've compiled all of this, and there's a lot of, it's 350 pages, and a lot of photographs. So, photographs of people and places and so on. And that's compiling that. And then you get to the point of saying, well, I've done enough research and collation. Then it's finalizing the writing. The most difficult part for me, because I wasn't producing this as a commercial product, I decided I didn't want to send it to an editor who would have charged me thousands of dollars to do a final edit on the book. Of doing the editing yourself, it's really difficult to edit your own work. And so I was finding that I could only do about 10 pages at a time of doing those final edits, and I did it 3 times. And I will guarantee you there are still errors in it, but it's that diminishing returns. The last run through, the third sort of proofread that I did of it, I picked up about 5 errors, and I went, there were 500 errors in the first run through.
Yeah.
And so, if I did it again, I might pick up 1. It doesn't mean there's only 1 there, but you just get immune to seeing your own flaws.
Well, you see it so often too.
You know what it says, so you don't read it.
That always happened to me with writing scientific papers.
Yeah.
There would always be massive issues if I handed it to someone else, but after I'd read it 10 times, I was like, I'm not seeing what other people are saying.
You don't actually read it.
Yeah.
And that was
I just
the thing
know what's there in each section.
I had to force myself to literally read it word for word.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I found is that you read it out loud, because that means you are reading every word. Whereas if you just, particularly doing this as you end up scanning it. No, stop it. I actually want to check for every spelling error. And yes, I can do a spell check, but a spell check doesn't detect context.
Yeah.
Yeah, the word might be spelt correctly, but it's just the wrong word to put there. Yeah, and so on. So but it was fun. Hopefully you get something out of it and you stick it on a shelf and never look at it again. But yeah.
No, well, it's always good to have. I can imagine this is one of those things that's interesting to talk about. You can probably give some pointers to the listeners here, but I'm always chatting to Kel about her family history because I can imagine that it just shits all over mine. No offense, but
Hey,
she's got
your mother's book 2 will come out if I ever get your mother to start writing hers, because she's got some really interesting stuff. Because you're related to European royalty, 20 generations ago. The old gag about people say their ancestors came over with William the Conqueror when they came to England. Well, William the Conqueror was your ancestor.
We
anyway,
did an episode on that, but
Kel's is much more diverse.
Well, she did a DNA test and found out that she's got at least 5 sub-Saharan African countries, I think, that lineages that she's come from. So I would imagine that's the potential then for at least 5 people in her history who were brought over to Brazil as slaves from 5 different countries. There's probably many more than 5 people that led into her, biologically, like her family is partly from 5 different places in Africa, and then I think she has indigenous
native
South American,
indigenous South American,
and then a shitload of European from all over the place: France, Spain, Portugal, Ireland. And it's just one of these things where I'm like, my God, you should really try and dive in and learn a bit more about your history, because it's probably, you think it's boring, and it's probably boring for the first few generations. But if you can get back into the meat of it, to when people first started coming to Brazil and learn about why they decided to come to Brazil, or why they were forced to come to Brazil, they're going to be the interesting stories.
That's what I call this book, as you can see, Becoming Australian.
Yeah.
Because for me, and I make the point in the introduction that because obviously Kel has migrated to Australia, and even though your mother is Australian, because both her parents are Australian, she was born in England. And so you go through that, and your children are 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 6th, 7th, and 8th generation Australians. There's only one generation in those 8 that have come to Australia that is missing, in terms of that generation either was born in Australia or never arrived in Australia. And so it's the migration stories as to how and why and when and where did people come, is the really interesting part. And where did they come from is equally interesting, but it's almost that, I became an Australian because my father came here, my great-grandparents came here, great, and so on, all came here for various reasons at different times. And looking at, where they came from and why they came is an interesting thing to do.
So what pointers would you have for people who are listening to this? I mean, are there sort of broad tips that you could give people who don't necessarily have, what's it called, the system that we have for, Christian births, deaths, and marriages that has held a lot of our information over generations? Parishes, right? Parish documents.
Yeah, well, there's church records, and then there are the civil records as well.
Yeah.
So obviously in Australia, we've been recording, civil registration started very early in a context, within decades of Australia, or at least New South Wales becoming a colony. And in many European countries, it was sort of early to the middle 19th century that civil registration, that is, the government were recording births, deaths, marriages.
Yeah.
But before that, it was the church. And in fact, if you're English, we have a huge advantage over many others in Europe, because the Catholic Church never gave a shit about recording births, deaths, and marriages. There might be a few that were recorded, but they didn't do it as systematically.
Yeah.
Whereas the Church of England, when it was created, did it systematically because they wanted to prove that these people were not Catholic, because the Church of England split off from the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
It was important to them to demonstrate that, yes, you were baptized. Nobody recorded births, but you were baptized in the Church of England. You were married in the Church of England. You were buried in a Church of England graveyard. Those were important things to be recorded to prove that you were not Catholic. And so, the whole England going back to the middle of the 16th century when the Church of England was created, the parish records are a huge thing, which is not the case in many other European countries. It's much more difficult to trace your ancestry back past civil registration. In the case of, and I've had many discussions with people, and I've even had some reasonably close relatives say, "Oh, we came over with William the Conqueror," that old gag.
Yeah.
And I said, "How do you know?" Because unless you are related to the aristocracy, none of that was recorded before the creation of the Church of England in Britain. Scotland were very good as well at recording a lot of those things because the Scottish Church, ironically, Scotland was as important to say we're not part of the Church of England, and their Catholic churches were recording things very well. So, that was the sort of reverse psychology in Scotland. But in order to demonstrate that you have older heritage than that, and if you before the middle of the 16th century, the only people who recorded that were the aristocracy and royalty, because for them, inheritance of property and property marrying other property, families marrying other families, it was important to document. So, you can, well, your mother has, you can trace your ancestry back 30 generations because you have one connection with the aristocracy, which then goes into royalty. And that becomes extremely incestuous. You get that one line, and then all of a sudden you're related to every royal family in Europe because they all intermarry.
The ironic thing is we probably all can make our way back into aristocracy somehow. It's just whether or not you can actually find.
Yeah, although I everything I know about my ancestry would suggest that no, we were just agricultural laborers, shit kickers, and fishermen, agricultural laborers, not filth,
serfs.
Doing the good service work and domestic servants and so on. So yes, most people would probably have some relationship back somewhere, but there is also that thing that the vast majority of people have never been related to the aristocracy. They were the serfs. They were the scum out doing the hard work.
It is funny though. I think I was looking this up, and it's like if you go back 35 generations, and assuming all your relatives are from the same location, right? So the same country, you are effectively as equally related to every single person in that population.
Yes,
right?
It's
statistically speaking, like genetically speaking, the amount of genetics that would be in you, say from so mum traced back to William the Conqueror, and I think went to Charlemagne.
Many generations before that.
So once you get back there, it's like we have one line there, but if you were to pick any other average person up out of France or England at that time, they would probably be equally related to me.
Yeah, of course, because it's actually a diamond shape in terms of relationships.
Yeah.
Because the gag is that you've got twice as many relatives as I have.
And Noah's got twice as many as me.
And Noah's got twice as many as you, and so on.
Yeah.
But that only works, as you say, as you go back so many generations. But when you get back to the point of you multiply, well, I can't do it in my head, but 2 to the power 20 is a huge number.
Yeah.
And it is probably beyond the population of Britain at that time.
Yeah.
And so, therefore, you're related to every person that ever existed in Britain, as an example. And so...
Yeah, that's 2 to the power 20 is 1,048,576.
Yeah.
So there probably would have been about that many people, right?
But you go back another 4 generations, say, which is only 100 years, just over 100 years, then you've suddenly got 16 million, which is more than the population of Britain at the time. Not just England, but Britain. And we're only talking about the British components of us. But yes, you can then say, we go to Europe and blah, blah, blah. But you end up getting to the point where the population of the world is smaller than the number of notional relatives you have. So those notional relatives have got to start to double and triple and quadruple up. Is that you get these multiple things. And that's the same, when your mother was doing this research into the royal families and relationships to royal families. It all comes through one person.
Yeah.
And it all goes back to a small number of people in the end, but all you're looking at is the royals. And so, it's you're in the grander scheme of things, when you go back thousands of years, it's a diamond-shaped ancestral tree, because we always think of ancestral trees as just constantly expanding upwards, but it doesn't work that way.
Well, yeah, it is interesting when you see those sorts of TV shows and they go back in time and see one ancestor, and you kind of like, if you just look around, everyone's your ancestor. You went back to, a thousand years ago or whatever, and you start looking around, you're like, this was my great 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 grandfather, and you're like, yeah, but you could probably point at any other man here in this movie, and it would be the same story, right? Like,
yeah, probably,
especially if he's from the same town.
Yeah, but and look, in the end, for me, I only go back 5 generations in this, and that's because I can document, apart from one person, I can document all of the other people in that generation legitimately. The one I have that is questionable, I'm 99% sure it is the right person, but I've got no absolute documentary proof that it is. And that's one of the challenges that you have, is that the further back you go, the less information you have, and the less reliable the information that you do have is. So I haven't bothered to try it. And there are some where I can go back 11 generations, but it's pointless for me to do that and try and talk about them, because, yes, I know this person was born and they had a child. That's it. Yeah. And so who cares about that? So what I've tried to do in the book is to talk about, say my great-grandparents or great-great-grandparents, is where were they born? What did they do? How did they get together? What did their children do? Rather than just, do this giant family tree with, a whole lot of branches of just dates and places on it. So.
Have you heard of the TV show Omniscient from Brazil? You probably haven't.
No. I tend not to try and keep up with Brazilian television. But, not that I try not to. I just don't.
There'll probably be a shitload of Brazilian listeners. So many right now, like maybe
of course
3 listening and being like, "I love that show." So this show is effectively, they're living in a society where 24/7 there's a surveillance drone, a small little mosquito-looking drone that follows the person around and watches them, and so it's effectively eradicated crime. But the premise of the whole show is that someone gets obviously murdered, and because the drone footage didn't see that murder or didn't identify it as a crime, it's not a murder. And so they have to unwind that. But I was thinking, I'm mentioning this for a reason, but I kind of jumped ahead to this because I just looked it up. Does it blow your mind how, if we go back to your generation or even your parents' generation, like if your parents were still here prior to, say, the 90s, the sum total of evidence of their existence in this planet, in this world, could have probably fit in a briefcase, right, in terms of photos or documents.
Yep.
And I mean, volume-wise, the sum total of my evidence can probably fit on this device right here.
Yes.
I'm holding in front of my face, my phone.
Yeah.
But does it blow your mind today that so much of Noah's life, for example, is documented now from the beginning? And just how much, when he's my age, he's probably going to have access to some kind of digital library of his life, effectively, where he'll be able to flick through, probably almost to a daily basis. There'll probably be gaps. But
the question is going to be, who is going to curate this stuff, not just for Noah, but for millions of children in the world who are living in a socioeconomic situation that enables them to, A, have access to the technology now, and B, have access to the technology in the future that will be able to collect it and collate it and so on. Who's going to be curating that stuff to the point where Noah is ever going to want to, and I'm using Noah as the example, but ever going to be even capable of going back and going, show me what I was doing on the 15th of August in 2024.
Well, I imagine, though, it would probably be a similar thing to Facebook, of the Facebook memories, how they just randomly show you shit that happened on this day from, last year, 2 years ago, 10 years ago, where you could just get on this database and it'll be like, here's what you were doing 4 years ago, or here's what you were doing, in 2005.
But that's my point, is that Facebook is curated.
Yeah,
Facebook is a database.
It'd be digital, right?
Yeah. But when you upload something to Facebook or Instagram or any of the other social media or the web in general, there's a date and time stamp, a location stamp, and that sort of stuff. Who posted it, so that's relevant. But at the moment, most of that digital information about Noah, as an example, sits on your phone.
Yeah,
it might sit on your computer, or some of it. Where is it going to end up to the point where Noah can actually get access to it?
Well, I would imagine it eventually just get connected to the cloud, right? And the cloud would be through a website where you could just go. Who knows?
but
Who knows?
you dump a terabyte of information up there, and then how does that get
Yeah.
tagged, curated, that sort of stuff? And it'll all be there. And you're right, it is very different. I don't think about my childhood. Everything that I know about me, or everything that you could know about me, other than asking me, would sit in a shoebox.
Yeah.
So a couple of photo albums and a few documents. And
it's not much different from me as well, right? I mean, I don't think you've got video of you as a child, right?
No.
I think the first video I have is when we went to Fraser Island and my Uncle Paul had a video camera there with him, right? So it would be like 12, 13.
Yeah, that's 2000.
Whereas Noah has video of him effectively at least every week, I would imagine, from the day he was born. And so I guess that was my point. It blows my mind how quickly this has changed, but also how... what's it going to be like in the future? Are we going to end up with these drones that just follow us around and record every single moment of every single day that you could potentially, whether or not it's used for crime or whatever, you could just look up? It's just nuts. And it's always one of those things. The reason I guess I mention this is because you see these things about your ancestors, right? Like in your book, and you think, fuck, this person, all that's left of this person is a handful of documents and maybe a photo or two, especially if they're from the 1800s. And that wasn't that long ago.
Yeah.
And yet they lived an entire life, right? Like you find out they died at the age of 80 or whatever, and you're like, I'm not even 35, and I have shitloads of photos and videos and stories, and there's I'm a person, I have all this history behind me, but it's almost tragic that there are so many people that you would just never know anything about, and that nothing of them remains effectively.
Yeah, but also this is not just incidental stuff too. That somebody in your circumstance is a good example of. I could drop dead tomorrow, and your children could go back in 2, 5, 10 years and look at 100 episodes of the Goss and go,
Dad just talking shit.
This is what my dad and his dad were talking about.
Yeah.
This is so. There is not just a record that says they existed and they lived here and they did this job, but there is just it's living data.
Well, and I think that's the deeper thing to it. I would love to be able to consume content like the Goss, even if it was a handful of episodes of your father speaking, or even your mother speaking, or let alone your other ancestors, to really know about, just to get a glimpse of what their days were like, what they were worried about, what they found interesting, their facial expressions, what turned them on, what did they think of wildlife, of politics, of those sorts of things. So it is one of those things where I'm glad that my son will have access to this content for me and you. But it is this tragedy that I've always sort of thought about with ancestors. It's just like all you have are your memories. And imagine what it was like, in the 1800s or prior to the camera being made, where you didn't even have photos, right? Someone died, and that was all you may have had was a possession that they had.
Unless you were rich and famous, you had a painting, and that was it.
And even then, that doesn't necessarily represent what the person actually looked like 100%.
No,
exactly. So it is a really interesting, I don't know, kind of thought. But I'm always on the side of it's really unfortunate that we don't have more.
Yeah, no, I agree. And that's, funnily enough, that was part of was the major part of the motivation for me writing this book. Is if I don't, and not just talking about me, but because hopefully I'm around long enough for your children to actually ask me some of the things they might want to know.
Just keep getting that prostate checked, Dad. You'll be fine.
Yeah, exactly. It was more, my parents and grandparents and so on, of writing what I know about them and what I can document. Because without doing that, there's stuff in here that nobody else knows, because they're conversations that I had with my parents, or there's documentation that I've collected and can put a story together around how they met, as an example. And, and so if I don't record that, it's gone.
Do you ever
feel, that was the motivation.
Do you ever feel like that tragedy of, oh, my grandfather was such a cool... Pete, you would have loved this guy. And you're kind of like, it's just such a shame that we can't reach across the generations and get these two people to sit down and chat to one another. You're like, geologically speaking, it's such a short amount of time, but at the same time, it's a insurmountable barrier. There was just no way that you were ever going to be able to communicate with your great-great-great-grandfather. But there are people that were in the middle that knew both of you, right? Like my grandfather knows his grandfather, would have met his grandparents, but
Yeah,
they would
exactly.
have been born in the mid 1800s, right? So
Yeah.
it is just, it's one of these things where I'm like, it's so funny. All humans have, there's no real difference, right? Throughout the most recent 10, 20, 100 generations, we were all effectively the same personality, the same sort of people we are today. There was no, we used to have 3 legs and, hated honey, but
Yeah.
but you just never have the chance. Like, imagine how cool it would have been to have understood what Julius Caesar was going through, right? Like, before he was murdered, because
Exactly.
he was just a human being like everyone else.
Yeah.
So I always have those kinds of thoughts, and I'm just like, fuck, it would have been so good to have some kind of connection with so many people, even from only 100 years ago.
Yeah, well, it's that. I
That's a
mean,
shame.
you remember when Facebook and MySpace, for want of a better,
Yeah.
remember that when they first came out, and these sort of what we would now call memes, but today's version of what a meme is actually not what the original thing was, but these memes going around of, as in behavioral memes of, here's 20 questions, introduce yourself. And, one of those questions is often, who would you like to meet?
Yeah.
And I always used to, partly facetiously, but, partly in reality, say, my great-great-grandchildren.
Yeah. So you'd go forward, you wouldn't go backwards.
Yeah, well, but at the same thing, it works the same way that, I would like to go back and talk to my great-grandparents or great-great-grandparents, but I would also like to be able to meet, and not just because I want to live till I'm 150, but I would also like to meet my great-great-grandchildren to see what their life is like.
Yeah, what problems have you guys got?
I don't need to live that long, but I'd like to jump forward 100 years.
Yeah. Have you got flying cars yet?
Yeah, exactly.
I think I would probably go forward if I could choose, as opposed to backwards. And I think that's probably because we understand what's happened in the past, right? We have a somewhat of an idea of what people have gone through and what people didn't have, their struggles, but the future is still yet to be written. And so,
to me, the going backwards, I would much rather go back and, yes, I would like to have met my father's father, but only because I didn't. And so,
that's it. It ended up being a short convo, and you're like, this guy's a dickhead. Like,
well, he was a congregational minister, a minister in the congregational church. So I think we would have had some fundamental differences in our view of the world.
You would have either had a lot to talk about or very little to talk about.
Yeah, but I think we also had a lot in common.
Yeah.
And you can read the chapter on him to decide whether you think that's true or not. But I would much rather go back and talk to famous people in the past. You mentioned Julius Caesar. The one person, if you would ask me who would I like to go back and interview, was Charles Darwin. I would. That would be one of the great things in life, to go back and just interview your scientific hero.
It wouldn't be that. It'd be a Q&A. I'd be like, ask me anything, dude.
Yeah.
What do you want to know? Like, about everything that's happened since you died, I'm happy to answer your questions. Or it's like, which hero would you have that you would allow to interview you?
Yes.
Because I'm sure he would have a lot more questions for me than I would for
him.
I'm
I'm sure he would. Yeah.
Anyway, this is probably a long enough episode, Dad.
All right.
Yeah, we didn't get to the news, so we can do that in the next one.
We didn't.
See you guys.
Bye.
Alrighty, you mob, thank you so much for listening to or watching this episode of The Goss. If you would like to watch the video, if you're currently listening to it and not watching it, you can do so on the Aussie English channel on YouTube. You'll be able to subscribe to that. Just search Aussie English on YouTube. And if you're watching this and not listening to it, you can check this episode out also on the Aussie English podcast, which you can find via my free Aussie English podcast application on both Android and iPhone. You can download that for free, or you can find it via any other good podcast app that you've got on your phone. Spotify, podcasts from iTunes, Stitcher, whatever it is. I'm your host, Pete. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope you have a ripper of a day, and I will see you next time. Peace!